Welcome to Run with Purpose. This is episode number 109. And for those of you that are new to the show, my name is Flores, and I'm so very glad that you found this podcast. Would love if you would subscribe. As always, you can reach out to me on all the socials at flores.run. Hope everyone is having a great start to their week. Took off last week from the show, but that's okay. Needed just an extra space to get some things done. You know, that's just how it works. Sorry, I got to adjust the microphone here. Sorry for all the noise. But yeah, things are going great. The past few weeks have been really good. Training's been going really well. The weather here in Minnesota has just been like the weirdest thing. We've had some snow, some ice, a little bit of rain, then it warms up a little bit, then it melts, and then it freezes again. It makes it very difficult to run. But I've been pushing through, having some pretty good runs, getting out there. I was able to just finish the city strides for Savage, where I live in Minnesota. If you don't know city strides, we've talked about it before, but this idea of running every single road in a city, it basically looks at public roads. And that's what I did. Ran all the public roads in Savage, working to maybe hit another one of the suburbs around here before we head out by the end of the year. But we'll see how that kind of plays out. But yeah, training is going really, really well. Prepping for Boston. That's coming up here, in a month? What's today? Yeah, in about a month. It's coming up. So it's coming up real fast. Kind of along those lines, shameless plug, always accepting donations as for my fundraiser that we're doing for Team BMC, so the Boston Medical Center. That's the team that I have the honor and privilege to be able to run for this Boston Marathon coming up in April 17th, I think is the date. I should know this offhand, but it's in April. You can donate there. There's a link in the bio on my Instagram, or you can send me a DM. However you do it, I appreciate you even thinking about it. This week, I'm starting some leadership courses, which is pretty cool. The only reason I bring it up is this idea of kind of getting comfortable with discomfort, right? Kind of pushing your limits. And I talk about these things of pushing yourself out there to stretch yourself. And I've been throwing around the idea of going back to school in a way, but decided, I was like, I don't really know if that's what I want to do. And then I was like, well, you can't tell other people to stretch themselves and to grow in that way if you're not willing to do the same thing. So here we are, stretching myself to do that. And I think it'll be really cool to grow in a different way, kind of understand leadership from a different aspect, even if it's from an educational, institutional type aspect. Hopefully you can get some little bits and pieces from there, which I think will be very, very exciting. What else? Hangry. It's been a minute since I kind of pushed Hangry. I know I talk about it at the end of every single episode to visit the store, but just wanted to kind of do another push for Hangry. If you're not familiar with what Hangry is, I have an episode about Hangry itself. I probably should have linked the episode, but I didn't. I'll find the episode and put it in the show notes. But Hangry is a nonprofit that my wife and I started to help those living with the issue of hunger. We help support them by providing food to food pantries, other organizations that are kind of on the ground making a difference for those living with the issue of hunger. We have things such as this t-shirt. If you're watching the video, I'm wearing one of our long sleeve tees. We have short sleeve tees, hats. We have a bunch of different items that you can go purchase from the store. So you can go to store.wearehangry.com to purchase that. Every item purchased actually provides 50 meals for families in America through Feeding America, our partnership with them. So yeah, definitely check that out. And if you're just interested in more information about Hangry, you just go to wearehangry.com, read all about us, see our impact report from 2021. Haven't finished the 2022 report as of yet, but once we have that up there, you'll be able to see that up there as well. I think that's all of the fun pre-stuff, if we will. But today's episode, came from me from this idea that I was kind of watching my roommates upstairs. And if you're a new listener, you're probably like, your roommates upstairs? I'm very confused. What are you talking about? That's what we call the kids that live upstairs that Kayla nannies. So there are 4 of them. And the twins are 18 months-ish, I think. But I was watching them a couple weeks ago, just kind of walk around and play. And one of them started to try to open up a book. It was one of those like thick books. It was like thick page books rather, where she was like, hey, how do I open this up? She was in there struggling with it, trying to understand. So she's maneuvering in her hand. She had something else in her hand, threw that down on the ground, kept moving with this book, trying to figure out what she could do to make this work. Then she ended up sitting down, a little bit of frustration, trying to understand, how do I turn this page? How does this work? How do my hands work in this aspect? Again, less than 18 months old, right? They're still figuring out all of these things. And, she got frustrated and then just put the book down. But that frustration didn't last too long and was able to pick the book back up and start trying again. This persistence, right? She was frustrated, but she was persistently trying towards this goal. Eventually, it paid off. She was able to open up the book and do her reading, which is her just mumbling as she points to pictures and looks at the rest of us. But this idea had me thinking about how we go about solving problems as adults compared to when we were children, and now looking back at children. It's hard for us to understand what we specifically were like as children, other than what family members might tell us. But this idea of looking at solving problems through maybe a different lens. As adults, we tend to get frustrated, just as children do when you're facing a problem. I think the difference is as adults, we're more likely to quit. So it seems, right? We'll get frustrated with a circumstance or a situation, or maybe even a person, and just say, yep, that's it. Not doing this anymore, and go the opposite direction, just leave things where they were. But observing children, there's this additional desire to learn and for them to do things themselves. I'm sure you've been in a similar situation, right? Where you've offered a helping hand to kids and they're like, no, I can do this myself. And this like pull back, right? This very independent process. And they have this thought that asking for help might be admitting defeat, or they want to kind of prove that they can do it. And maybe that's another episode kind of idea of this idea of asking for help. But if we circle to the children have this desire to learn how to tackle a situation. I think it's innate in us. We always want to grow and learn. However, as we get older, we let our frustrations get the best of us. And because of those frustrations, we end up quitting things, many times quitting things before we even actually gave it an opportunity to try. And when children are tackling these situations, when they actually solve this problem, there's this tremendous joy that comes from the actual solving of said problem, situation, issue, what have you. So I was thinking this episode to kind of break down this thought process of problem solving, to maybe better understand the steps that we could take to kind of have that same mentality as a child. So I'll keep referring back to this story, but using one of the twins as an example of how we can go about problem solving as adults. Now, this isn't a quick fix to, here's the solution to every problem. Just do these 5 steps and you're good. I think it's more of a workflow for us to think through. And again, this is my thinking as I was coming up with ideas for this episode itself of what we could kind of discuss in this. So I think starting off, we have to start off any problem or desire, if you will, with being curious, right? Without the curiosity, we're not going to be going after anything that's unknown, right? And that's where the problem is to be solved. If there's a problem, I'll solve it. No, we're not going to go down that path. That's fine. But if we don't have the curiosity, I don't know why that just pops into my head after writing all the notes and preparing for this episode. That's the first time that's come into my head. But without the curiosity, we're not going to jump in to a situation that's unknown because the solution's already there. The unknown is where we're getting into this problem solving, right? The idea of her trying to open up a book. It is unknown. It's new. It's fresh to her. You know, many folks had read her books, and she may have seen how they did it. So she knew it was possible, but she had this curiosity to figure out how to do it herself. And then just to be clear, this isn't the first time that she's opened a book. It was just an idea of me seeing it, this kind of friction we can take for granted as adults of like, it's easy, just open the book. Like we get to that point, right, where we're trying to help people. We're like, I don't understand where you're at. Why don't you just get this? Not realizing that one point in time, it was our first time opening a book, so to say. But I think once we're curious about something, we then get to define the problem, right? We have this curiosity, and then we actually have to figure out what the problem is, actually put something to it. This definition aspect is obviously a common thing when we talk about anything with purpose or really doing anything, is we have to take a moment to define what the problem is. And once you have that, then you're able to think through, what does a quote unquote done win look like? But you can't do that until you have the problem. I do this with my team at work all the time, is if we have a project or work to do, we need to define what the problem is so that we know what it looks like when we actually reach a solution. Right? If we don't define the problem, it allows the thing to really be like open-ended, which then can lead to scope creep or maybe even a lack of focus. And when we start getting those things and things start going wide, that's when we lose interest. Whether ourselves, the group we're working with, whatever the case may be, that's where interest becomes lost because we're not actually focusing on the problem at hand. All of a sudden, what seemed like a direct problem, we understood it, got wider and wider and wider because we didn't know how to say, hey, the problem has been solved. Now, I'll talk about this a little bit later as well, but this idea that just because we solve a problem doesn't mean more problems don't arise from it, right? You probably have things in your life like this where you go down a path and you're like, okay, I'm going down this path because this is my done win. Excuse me. And then along that journey, we find a couple branches where we're like, we need to fix that. We need to fix that. We need to fix that. But they're not crucial to get to your done win. Those become things you just need to kind of, for a technical term, but basically what we use at work is carding it up, right? Carding up more work to look at those additional problems, not taking away from the actual problem that you're solving right now. I've digressed way too far into that. This idea, though, we need to make sure after we are curious about the situation, we need to actually define the problem in order to define what it means to be done or solve said problem. Once we do all of that, once we kind of say, here's the problem, this is what it's going to look like when we're done with the problem, we need to take a step. This is the thing that separates most, I think, when it comes to problems or problem solving, is actually taking that first step. You know, I think we have a huge problem in our culture where a lot of folks love pointing out the problems, love pointing out what this person is doing wrong, what that person is doing wrong, what this group is doing wrong, how they can fix this, how they can fix that, and sometimes even giving what they believe to be solutions for these problems. However, they're not willing to take a step towards it. They're just pointing the finger and not actually being a part of the process and taking the step for action. Now, I understand there's only so much things that we can all do based off of influence and that sort of thing, but you have to be making a step in that direction to be a part of the problem-solving process. You know, most people do this if they're not directly affected by it, right? They're not going to take action if they're not directly affected. Or maybe even worse is that we would only take action if we're going to get noticed or praised for it. That hits. This idea that I'm only going to do something, only going to be a part of solving the problem if I get recognition for doing that. It's so easy to say, just do this thing or go this route or fix this problem when you're sitting on the sideline in your comfort. These kinds of folks, these kinds of situations end up adding more to the problem than actually helping it, right? Taking a step has a cost. Sometimes that cost is just time, but in other instances, depending on the problem, it could cost you financially. Maybe even cost you relationally, having to have the tough conversation with someone that could have a longer impact in how you interact with that person or in a situation or a group or what have you. But in order to get towards any solution, you have to be willing to take a step. Without the step, there's no action that's being taken place, right? So you have to take the step. Sitting in your comfort doesn't solve the problems. And obviously I can go on and on about the taking a step. We've talked about this a ton of times on the show, this idea of moving forward with purpose, making that difference to continue going on, right? But the next thought, once you actually are taking those steps and you're in that process, right? The meat and potatoes, if we will, the actual workflow of things, we need to think outside of the box. Revolutionary thinkers don't just play a rinse and repeat game, right? You think of any of the revolutionary thinkers and inventors, that sort of thing of our time over the last 100 years, they haven't just rinsed and repeated a situation because that means you're just doing the same thing. They would, however, kind of take from a couple different people, right? They would get a couple different ideas, some from this side, some from this side, and then sprinkle a little bit of their outside the box thinking. There are a lot of their what ifs. Could this be possible? Let me investigate it. And that's what they do to make a difference. And kind of alongside of that, sometimes that means you have to bring in some others alongside of you for help, right? We don't know everything. We need to bring people along that can guide in the same direction. I know this kind of goes back to the asking for help from other people in this, maybe a negative connotation sometimes of asking for help, but I think it's not a bad thing to throw ideas off of other people, or really the right kind of people. And when I say right kind of people, there really has to be an understanding of kind of trust and respect through that process, but also the understanding to kind of prevent groupthink. This idea that just because one person said anything and then the most influential person, that's the right way. Or if one person disagrees with the rest of the group, that they shouldn't speak up, right? You have to have the right people in your group to understand, hey, if we're going to do this together, if we're going to make a change together, we're going to solve this problem together, we all need to be a part of it, asking the questions in a way that's also providing constructive feedback, right? Not just attacking people. And I think there's a dangerous line that folks can go down there when you think about bringing in people. But I think from another aspect of bringing in people, there's this idea of kind of building a community that is helping more than just yourself in this actual learning process, right? You're spreading the knowledge and support through whatever the problem you're solving is. And then that's how we kind of grow across the board, because we are feeding ideas off of each other, continuously thinking about things in different ways, which then allows us to grow in maybe ways that we were not as strong in previously. It's my whole idea with the podcast of getting guests on the show. I don't try to just get guests that agree with everything that I say. The thought process is they don't agree with everything I say, so I can understand their point of view. Does it mean they're going to change my mind in every situation? Absolutely not. But they can make me think about things in a different way and help me understand how to reframe some ideas. So, how many instances have we seen where when we actually do this, when we actually bring folks together to work on something, that it actually helps kind of create almost like a movement? And that support helps things grow faster. And we learn from our mistakes. We can continue to make differences. We've also seen the opposite, where one person says it has to be my way or the highway. And then in doing that, things just fail because people aren't willing to accept feedback and that sort of thing. I think, again, a whole nother rabbit hole. But this idea of bringing folks along with you for the journey, I think is going to make all the difference. And then once we've done all these things and arrived at our done win, again, very simple process here. I'm not talking about how to actually solve the problems themselves, but more of that workflow. But once we arrive to this done win and we have the solution, if you will, we need to take a moment to reflect. Whether you call it a reflection or a debrief, whatever it is, the purpose is clear. You need to look back at the situation and learn. See where you made mistakes previously that you can prevent in the future when tackling something similar or working with specific people, how that interaction took place, right? You learned from more efficient ways and more effective ways to actually do the things that you were doing. You know, if it's a repeatable process, all right, how do I continue to refine it? Again, it becomes a new done win. But this idea of being able to look back and at least reflect on it. Now, I think there's a back and forth on this is, yes, you should look back and learn what you need to do forward, but you don't need to stay in the past with the back. You don't need to continue to reflect that you basically just only reflect on the situation and not continue moving forward. You need to reflect and then move forward, put those things into action, take the step, if you will, to continue making a difference. You know, these ideas will help spin up other ideas to keep everything moving, kind of talking about those branches again, right? Like something came up in the process and you're like, hey, wait a second. That's another question that we need to answer. I'm not going to do it right now because it's going to affect my done win, but we come back to it. You use those times of reflecting, the debrief, whatever you want to call it. That's when you go back into those instances to really understand where you need to be going forward. Now, that's the general flow that I think could be helpful for us to think through. But I wanted to circle back to the start here and how can we support those when they're going through problems. You know, we think about my roomie opening the book. I could have just gone over and helped her. Right? I could have just walked over her, helped her open the book. She would have looked at me, smiled, possibly ran away. And there's nothing wrong with being supportive when folks are going through something or needing a problem to be solved, or support for that problem rather. But let's say I did that day after day for a week. Every single time I saw her struggling with a book, I just walked over and opened it. At some point, she's going to stop trying to open it herself. And when she wants the book or whatever the case might be, she's just going to bring the book to me. This idea of almost stepping in every single time there's a problem and just fixing it, quote unquote, it turns the curiosity off because the solution's already been reached. The solution is go to Jonathan, he'll take care of it. This idea of they're going to help me with it, so why would I do it myself? And my thought process is how do we help teach others rather than just giving it? Not to say that we need to intentionally hold back skills to make people kind of struggle, right? Of like, I'm holding this back, you need to figure this out your own way and yada, yada, yada. Because I think that can be a little cruel in an aspect. You're basically just setting people up for failure instead of supporting them. But I think there's a better way of doing it, right? We can lead a horse to water, but we can't make them drink. You know, even though even though sometimes it feels like it's easier, are we actually doing more damage to folks by continuously stepping in that way? Again, not saying that we shouldn't support people when they are in need, but this idea of just continuously doing this and almost numbing the process. You know, it's not a just get over with, just deal with it. But I think we've gotten to a point where we as a culture are just being soft. This idea that because of how I feel in a situation, that we don't try to go through the process. Right? A situation where we are using our feelings to limit our potential and then expect other people to pick up the pieces. You know, I know feelings right now are all over the place in our culture. And I'm not saying feelings aren't important, because they definitely are. You should be able to kind of understand your feelings, understand where you're at, and also be able to share those feelings. But in that same breath, you shouldn't expect others to change their behavior or action based on how you feel. It's borderline manipulation, right? Definition of manipulation itself is doing it with some sort of, I don't know, there's a bad motive in it to cause it manipulation. But this idea, we are expecting people to adjust their behaviors on how we feel. Therefore, if we want to flip it that way, this idea that your feelings control how I do things. And that's what I mean by being soft. There was a comedian, I was sharing some of these notes with a buddy of mine, and he sent me this comedian bit that talked about like millennials are like overly self-aware, but they only have half of the problem, right? They're like, I have anxiety. And the guy's like, that's great. You know, what are you doing about it? He's like, absolutely nothing. I'm just telling you so you can work around it. And that's the whole problem here is like, if you know what the problem is, not saying there's a simple solution, I'm sure I'll get slack for this, not saying that there's always a simple solution, but if you know what the problem is, how do you continue to go forward and solve it? Not expect other people to dance around you in that process. This thought that we have to be less direct or maybe even sometimes less impactful in order to serve everyone's feelings. The fact that we have to filter ourselves in order to reach a common denominator to make sure everybody feels okay with whatever the situation is. I think we need to work on changing the narrative and understand that just because you feel that way doesn't make it so. You may feel like you can't do something, but that doesn't mean that I should do it for you. You may feel like the conversation is going to be tough, but that doesn't mean that you just ignore it and stay in your comfort bubble. In my opinion, this overemphasis on feelings has caused us to have more excuses about our soft skills, such as problem solving. And I'm noticing this more and more with kids. Parents that instead of teaching their kids to take time and think things through, just hand them the solution and not focus on the lesson in the process, right? It's this thought process of, give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, feed him for a lifetime. These things are going to have a lasting effect as it promotes this idea of why would I do it when someone else will do it for me? When we allow our feelings to dictate what we're able to accomplish, we're going to limit the reach that we have, the impact that we can make. Understanding your own feelings are important. But you should also understand that your feelings change. They can be here for a season and change just as quickly. Let's circle back to the roomie. When she succeeded in opening the book, there was so much joy. It was just all over her that she was able to open up this book. She had a problem and she overcame it. And I'm sure in that process, she felt like it was impossible. Or that maybe she wasn't strong enough to do it. Or maybe she felt she didn't have the right skill set to open the book. Or maybe she felt that her sister was making her feel that she wasn't good enough to be able to do it. And the twins aren't like that, but you understand my point here. Her feelings didn't hold her back. She persisted through that, understanding the process there, taking the steps necessary to reach her goal. So if we wrap it up, I think we need to get back to the understanding of the basis of problem solving. Not using our feelings or our circumstances to limit our impact or limit our ability in actually solving problems. We need to be curious about what's out there. Don't just let things be the way they are because that's how they've always been. Be curious. Take that initiative to try to understand the unknowns, if you will. Bring others along. Think outside of the box to help guide the change. And once we find this done in a situation, take time to reflect, to find efficiencies, find things that you could have done better in the process. But don't sit in that cycle, right? We need to continue moving forward. But if we can wrap it up all into one sentence with problem solving, is you need to be curious and take the step. You reach out to me everywhere on social media at flores.run. Subscribe, leave a review for the podcast if you like it. I'd like to know. You can reach me in the DMs as well. But thanks so much for joining me today. Remember to keep running with purpose, one step at a time. See y'all next week.